1.5 years, I found myself at the negotiating table to form a new government. And at this moment, the Netherlands didn't yet have this positive sentiment that we find here today, because we were at the depth of an economic crisis. We had had our second national elections within a year and a half. So the parties at the negotiating tables, the traditional oppositional parties, the Social Democrats and the Liberals, agreed that this was the moment to undertake a number of major reforms. A number of reforms that were taboo in the past decades. And we said, if we don't take our responsibility now, we will be blamed afterwards, and rightly so, for not taking our responsibility in this depth of this crisis. And one of the major reforms we undertook was the Dutch housing markets. And as I learned at school, the old Roman saying that it is honorable and sweet to die for your country, I became responsible as Minister of Housing. And during my first year, I introduced a number of legislation to Parliament to tackle the toughest problems in the Dutch housing market. Because the Dutch housing market historically has a number of peculiarities, both on the side of the owner-occupied housing, as on the, especially the social rental sector. As for the owner-occupied housing, we have a tradition of very high mortgage loans. The last decades up till 120% loan to value, and usually up till 6 times annual income without any amortization, so interest-only loans. This created a housing bubble. And it made it very hard for new entrants on the housing market to buy another house. And as the financial crisis arrived and it became harder to obtain a mortgage, house prices started to decline. So over the last couple of years we saw a decline in house prices of about 20%. On the other hand, the rental sector has been very much characterized by a very large portion of social housing. Although we are one of the richest countries in the world, 1 in 3 Dutchmen lives in a house owned by a social housing corporation. In the city of Amsterdam, it's even more than half of the population. Of course, social housing corporations do very good work for people with lower incomes, but the last couple of years they very much entered the middle income segment of the market. And as the old saying goes, bad money drives out good money. They thereby created an unlevel playing field, and institutional investors shunned away from the Dutch housing market. Social housing corporations work with the state guarantee, so they can lend very attractively. So the reforms I undertook was first of all reform the mortgage market. New mortgages have to be 30 years amortizing loans at a maximum of 104% loan to value, and we will decrease this to 100%. Furthermore, we will slowly reduce the tax deductibility of the interest and give it back in a lower overall tax rate on income. On the rental side, I allowed rent increases. Since 2007, rent was only allowed to increase with inflation, and in the years before that it varied, but traditionally as long as people stayed in their house, rents could be hardly increased. So you will find elderly people in the beautiful, most beautiful parts of Amsterdam still at a rent of €400 a month, because they have been protected for decades, and of course they will never leave. This created a situation where, although we have a very large stock of social housing, people, especially in the larger cities, younger people have to wait for 7 to 10 years until they will find a home. So that was the other terrain where we really needed to take measures. Well, one of these was to allow for rental increases. Another important measure that is still underway is a law that brings back social housing corporations to their original task, social housing. Because indeed I believe they have a very important task there, but as the panel also said, it's very important for commercial parties to know that they will not be confronted with an unlevel playing field because of the social housing corporations with a state guarantee also acting in this liberalized rental sector. Of course, Parliament still has to decide on it, but as we saw that the measures I undertook, which really were very sensitive political subjects, did find a majority. Even though our government doesn't have a majority in the Senate, I won't bother you with all the peculiarities of the Dutch system, but it really was a political dogfight to get those laws through Parliament. But at the same time, you saw that a number of Dutch political parties are willing to take their responsibilities because they are convinced that this reform is so necessary that they took their responsibility and voted for my proposals. And that's the reason why I'm pretty confident that also this last important reform will take place. It's not the last, actually. I'm also planning a change in law which will introduce more room for temporary rental contracts, which will also create more flexibility. And that's the reason why, although I'm not an investment advisor or analyst, that's more your job, I am indeed convinced that it is a very good moment to invest in Dutch real estate. Economically, we are at the start of an economic upswing. We expect demand for housing, especially rental housing, because it has become harder than in the past to get these very high mortgages. So people at the start of their careers will first look for rental housing and save a little money to be able to buy later. So we expect a larger demand for rental housing. The increase in the number of households for the coming decade will be about 500,000, especially in the larger cities. So there will be a combination of a strong demand and a recovering economy. And as the panel spoke so much about a stable political environment, I will not contradict them. Professor Brownen asked me fairly clearly to act as a salesman for the opportunities in Dutch real estate, which I will gladly do. Indeed, I intend to speak with a number of both Dutch and foreign investors about the opportunities we offer. I will visit Munich again this autumn, and I'm also intending to visit a couple of other foreign investors, but of course also the large Dutch pension funds have my intention. All in all, I'm very glad with the positive words I heard here today, and I'm convinced that if I will be back here next year, you will be even more positive. Thank you very much.